Part 172. The Marital Dispute. The prophet lived an extremely humble life. Born an orphan, he was raised with nothing. As a shepherd, he worked for pennies, and he continued to live humbly throughout his life. After the Battle of Habor, in 7 after Hijri, almost 20 years into his prophethood, the prophet was gifted the plantations of Fadak, which he used to provide for his family. The Battle of Hunain provided an abundance of riches, and the leader is entitled to a portion as per the Sharia, but the prophet donated the entirety of his share, which amounted to millions of dollars in modern currency. Despite the Ummah's increasing fortunes and ever-improving financial state, the prophet's lifestyle did not change, nor did his worldly possessions increase. The prophet once sat with Jibreel, and another angel appeared. Jibreel said,
Allah has allowed this angel to descend for the first time, since the beginning of time, in order to meet you.
The angel then spoke,
O Muhammad, may peace be upon you. Your Lord has sent me to ask you a question. Do you want to be a prophet king or a slave messenger?
The highest position on earth is that of a king, and the lowest position is that of a slave. However, a messenger holds a higher rank than a prophet in the sight of Allah. Jibreel made a motion suggesting the lower position, that is, the slave messenger. The prophet replied, I choose to be a slave messenger. It was narrated, after this incident the prophet was never seen even eating with his back resting against a wall until he met his Lord. As the communal wealth of the Ummah increased, many companions' lifestyles visibly improved. Meanwhile, the prophet's lifestyle remained as it was during the difficulties of the Meccan era, as per his covenant with Allah. The prophet's wives, in their humanness, felt this disparity and began requesting more from the prophet. It is worth noting that their requests were halal and that they did not request extravagance. However, as explained, the prophet deferred his comfort for the hereafter, and this extended to his family. The wives' efforts were spearheaded by Aisha and Hafsa, and the remaining wives united in their requests. Umar ibn al-Hattab, Hafsa's father, narrated the entire incident.
We were a people from the Quraysh that would dominate our women, but when we came to Medina, we found that the women of Medina dominate their men. When we moved to Medina, our women were influenced by the Ansari women. One day, I became angry with my wife and reprimanded her, and she answered back. I rebuked her. How dare you answer back? She responded, You're rebuking me for responding back, but don't you know that the wives of the prophet respond back to him so much so that sometimes they leave him in their anger for the whole day? Her statement petrified me, and I said to myself, whoever amongst them does such a thing has suffered an immense loss. I immediately went to Hafsa and asked, My daughter, do you argue and respond back to the messenger of Allah such that you remain angry for the whole day? She said, Yes, we do. I rebuked her. Whoever does this has lost everything. Are you not scared of the anger of Allah upon you if the messenger of Allah is angry with you? Never respond back to the prophet, and never ask him for any of your extra needs. Come to me and do not irritate him. Don't let the status of your companion, that is Aisha, deceive you about your status, for indeed, she is dearer to the prophet than you are. I had a companion from the Ansar, and we would take turns in accompanying the prophet. One of us would attend to our work, and the other would visit the prophet for the day. One day I went to sleep after Isha, and my neighbor came running, banging on my door. I rushed out and asked, What is the matter? Have the Ghassanids attacked? My neighbor replied, No, something worse has happened. The prophet has divorced his wives. As soon as we prayed Fajr, the prophet secluded himself in his private room. I went to Hafsa, and she was weeping. I said, Didn't I tell you this would happen? Has the prophet divorced you all? She replied, I don't know. He left us and went to his private room. There was a servant standing outside the room, and I said, Ask the prophet for permission for me to enter. The servant went in and returned, saying, I mentioned that you were outside, but the prophet did not respond. I went to the mosque and waited by the pulpit, and I saw everyone crying and distressed on behalf of the prophet. Eventually, I returned and asked the servant again, and he gave the same response. I left again and returned a third time. This time, I said loudly so the prophet could hear, I think that the prophet thinks I am coming for Hafsa's sake, that is, as a father-in-law. No, by Allah, that is not the case. For if Allah and his messenger command me to execute Hafsa, I would obey the command. I was given permission and entered the room. In the room I found a handful of dried barley, a tanned leather bag for water, and a chamber pot. I began to cry looking at this state. The prophet was lying down, and when he turned to face me, I saw the marks on his back, from the bed made of date palm branches. I asked him immediately, "Have you divorced your wives?" The prophet replied that he did not. I then said, "O messenger of Allah, don't you remember how we, that is the Quraysh, would dominate our women? But then we came to Medina and saw that the women of Medina dominate their men, and our women have learned from them." I became angry at my wife, and lo and behold, she responded back to me. I did not approve, but she said, "Who are you to not approve when the wives of the prophet respond back to him?"
Umar then narrated his story to the prophet.
Finally, the prophet smiled. I then asked the prophet if I could take a seat. The prophet granted permission. I looked around, and by Allah, I could not see anything else in the room. And I said, "O messenger of Allah, why don't you make dua to Allah to grant you sustenance, just as he has given the Caesar and Husro? Even though they don't worship Allah." I began to cry, and the messenger of Allah said, "O son of Hattab, why are you crying?" I replied, "O messenger of Allah, the Caesar and Husro are indulging in their riches while you are Allah's messenger." The prophet then sat up and said, "O son of Hattab, are you in doubt? Are you not content that Allah has chosen us over them in the next world, and has given them this world for their pleasure?" I replied, "O messenger of Allah, ask Allah to forgive me."
The prophet informed Umar that he made an oath to Allah that he would not approach his wives for 1 month. After an entire month, the prophet went to Aisha's house and said, "O Aisha, I am going to talk to you about a matter, but don't be hasty in your decision. Go and consult your parents before you decide." The prophet then recited from Surah Al-Ahzab,
O Prophet, say to your wives, if you desire the life of this world and its luxury, then come, I will give you compensation and let you go graciously. But if you desire Allah and his messenger and the everlasting home of the hereafter, then surely Allah has prepared a great reward for those of you who do good. Surah 33, verses 28 to 29.
Aisha responded immediately,
"What is there to consult, O messenger of Allah? I have chosen Allah and his messenger and the home of the hereafter."
Every single wife followed suit and chose the messenger of Allah, turning down luxury in this world for the hereafter. The benefits derived from this incident are innumerable. Allah could have willed that the prophet's private life was pristine, but the prophet's role on earth was to guide and teach the Ummah. And these incidents allow us to learn from the prophet's patience and forbearance. In a society where physically abusing one's wife was completely normal, the prophet never once harmed his wives. Aisha narrated,
"I swear by Allah, never was the prophet's hand lifted against any woman or servant."
The incident also demonstrated the companions' love for the prophet, as they mourned his struggles more than their own. Umar's neighbor described the prophet divorcing his wives, as per the rumor, as worse than a military attack, and Umar scolded his own daughter for inconveniencing the prophet.